Hello, welcome to the Raw podcast brought to you by the Sunderland Echo. My name is Jason Jones, joined by James Copley, and I am delighted to say, James, that we have a Wear-Tyne derby victory to reflect on this morning. Sunderland won the first contest against Newcastle United of the season 1-0 on Sunday afternoon, courtesy of a rather unfortunate Nick Voltemade own goal. Has to be said, it was a brilliant header. Sent the Stadium of Light into delirium. Achieved the 3 points, scenes of celebration at the final whistle, selfies on the pitch. I mean, it was just a wonderful afternoon, all things considered, wasn't it?
Yeah, very nice. I hope everybody enjoyed themselves because it was good fun. I did not have Nick Voltemade channeling his inner Niall Quinn and winning the game on my bingo card list. It's an absolutely extraordinary moment. I've got no idea what he's trying to do there. It's incredible. And I think from a Sunderland fan perspective, quite funny to beat them in that way. He's actually been really good for Newcastle this season, I would argue. Big shoes to fill in Alexander Isak. He's cost a lot of money. He's actually hit the ground running. I've watched a lot of Newcastle this season. He's a player I don't mind at all, but for him to do that, that's going to live with him and stick with him for a long time. Poetic as well. Granit Xhaka referenced it after the game. Robin Roofs has referenced it after the game. Dan Ballard, of course, who was here the last time Sunderland lost to Newcastle in the FA Cup. Newcastle United took liberties that day. Newcastle United took liberties with Sunderland as a football club. Sunderland allowed them to as well in the build-up. This was a time when Sunderland was struggling under Mick Beale in the Championship. The clubs were not on an even footing. The teams were not on an even footing. Sunderland's ownership did not understand what the game meant to the region, and they allowed certain things to happen. That culminated in that on-pitch photo, didn't it, at the Stadium of Light, which was horrendous for Sunderland fans. But now that's been reversed, and Xhaka called it karma. I think that's very apt. And interesting that that's been used in the week as motivation. I think, and I heard Ando actually on the BBC Newcastle feed after the game saying he doesn't like these team photos because they do come back and bite you in the behind, and I think that's absolutely what's happened to Newcastle on this occasion. It was pointed, it was planned. We sit next to some of Sunderland's coaching staff in the press box just deciding. Sunderland was so confident of winning the game with 10 minutes to go that they actually radioed for the coaching staff to come down in preparation for the team photo, which I thought was brilliant. Maybe it could have gone wrong as well on another day, although Newcastle weren't threatening. So I think from a club perspective, from the fans' perspective, it was one of those sort of sorely needed afternoons to right a wrong, really, in a sense. And I mean, maybe we'll come on to it later, Jace, but the progression at Sunderland since January 2024, which is nearly 2 years ago, is incredible. Kira Louis-Dreyfus's approval ratings have shot up since then. He appeared to be an owner who didn't really understand Sunderland, and there was a lot sort of going on that we didn't agree with. But ever since then, you wonder if that made the penny drop, and it was a blessing in disguise, because it's been a joyous ride since. And they keep producing moments, this team, and I think that's what the best thing is. I mean, what a year we've had. The championship season last season was tremendous, and it got off to a good start, and Sunderland were competitive throughout. It was an enjoyable season. But then you had the absolute massive highs of the two Coventry games, the Sheffield United game. You have an amazing summer in which you spend 150 million, signed Granit Xhaka. A summer of intrigue, a summer of interest. You're then wondering how Sunderland will do in the Premier League. You have that fantastic opening day win against West Ham. Then you've got Chelsea away, Liverpool away. All of these moments coming from behind against Bournemouth, drawing against Arsenal, and then to top it off, you beat Newcastle at home. It's brilliant. And Regis Labrise as well. I mean, we'll come on to him, but yeah, a brilliant afternoon. I feel a bit like I did after the win at Wembley, where I'm just going to ramble until you interrupt me, Jace. So how did you find it? Because that was the first derby you'd covered. It was only my second, just the amount of time Sunderland have been in League One and the Championship, but it was a much preferable experience to the first one I covered.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, we will probably get into it in more detail, but it is just night and day from where we were, best part of 2 years ago, isn't it? The more I think about it and the more I look at it, I actually think that Derby defeat in the FA Cup in 2024 was, I almost regard it as the sort of the turning point of everything now. Because like you say, obviously it wasn't just the sort of insipid performance on the pitch, the way that, you know, Newcastle, like you say, and I think you're absolutely right, took liberties in that game and the aftermath of it, but it was all of the build-up, you know, the way that Sunderland sort of welcomed them into the ground. We all know what happened with, you know, the decoration and the controversy surrounding all that sort of stuff. And like you sort of, you know, mentioned there, it almost felt to me as if that's the point that the ownership have gone, okay, we get it now. We know what this needs to be. We know where we've gone wrong. And I think that, you know, obviously Michael Beale stayed for a little while longer after that, not much longer, but a little while longer after that. And I think even down to the decision to not rush into the appointment of the next permanent manager, you know, like waiting until the end of the season to bring in Regis, like giving it to Mike Dodds and sort of limping through the remainder of that season when so many people were calling for them to pull the trigger on a permanent appointment to get things moving. It kind of feels, consciously or otherwise, as if that was the game at which the club went, okay, this has been a wake-up call, the standards need to be better, and look what they've done since then. Do you know what I mean? Because, like I said, the progress and the distance we've covered in 2 years has been nothing short of remarkable. And I think the biggest feeling that I had yesterday was, you know, the feeling that sort of emanated from the squad and the way that Sunderland approached the game was one of retribution. You know, there was almost this refusal to allow it to happen again. Even little details, you know, and I know it's been covered a lot online, but you know, the refusal to put Newcastle's name on the score.
Yeah, I love that. That's brilliant.
It's
so petty.
It is petty, isn't it? But at the same time, it's a pettiness that I think first of all, it's so befitting of the fixture because we all know what it means, and we all know the sort of ill feeling that bubbles away beneath the surface of it. Obviously, it boils over sometimes as well, but it sends that message that there is absolutely no quarter going to be given from now on. And I think that the difference in, obviously, the players on the pitch, the quality that Sunderland are able to call upon, the tactical approach, all that stuff, but just the general stance and outlook and approach of the club is just, it's almost unrecognisable, you know, if we're being completely honest. There was that Granit Xhaka interview in the week, wasn't there, with Sky, where he said, like, we haven't even considered the fact that we're going to lose this game. And I think the biggest thing I felt and that I noticed from that first whistle, and I think that ultimately what I feel decided the game in Sunderland's favour, was that compared to Newcastle, from that first whistle, they came out and there was that feeling that they were dead set on winning this. The intensity was better, the hunger was better, you know, the way that they were flying into challenges, not giving them a moment to dilly-dally on the ball, to find their men. They were just constantly pressing and hassling and harrying. And I think ultimately in a game of a few chances, and if we're being honest, very little attacking quality, I think that's made the difference for Sunderland. And again, I think it all stems from this pivot in the way that the club presents itself now, the way that Regis has got them playing, and I think it's all interlinked.
Yeah, and I think that the club do deserve a lot of credit because they came in for a lot of stick. Rightly so, I must add. I mean, you think about that championship season, Sunderland finished 16th. Obviously, I think it was the wrong decision to sack Tony Mowbray. It was certainly the wrong decision to bring Michael Beale in. They then sort of gave up on the season by giving it to Mike Dodds, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way to Mike Dodds, but they wanted to really go through a process. So Sunderland didn't have a permanent manager for months. And we got to the summer and we all assumed that permanent manager would be sorted pretty quickly. And it dragged on and rumbled on and rumbled on and dragged on. And Sunderland fans became very frustrated and absolutely rightly so. But it does, I guess, show that it is important to do that due diligence and get somebody like a Regis Lebris in who you really trust. I mean, should you tank half a season to get there? Maybe that is poor planning. But I do have actually a lot of respect for Sunderland's decision makers in a sense that, yes, they messed up, but they took the time required to fix that problem. And that's not easy to do, to be honest, especially given the noise. You know, we were all saying we were all crying rank incompetency. Let's face it, and there was an element of that. I'm not trying to sort of airbrush history, but to sort of have the wherewithal to go, right, okay, we're in a bit of a hole here, but we actually absolutely need to get the rest of these decisions right and take some time to do it, I think was mightily impressive. And I just think Regis Labrise talks about connection, doesn't he? And you get that holy trinity of players, coach and staff, fans, and you could throw in the board as well. When they're all aligned and they're all singing off the same hymn sheet, there's not a lot to criticise at Sunderland across the board at the moment at all. Very rarely does anybody have anything to criticise. Maybe once in a while something to do with tickets or something like that, but it's very small fry now. And I'm not downplaying those concerns because obviously, they're major concerns for fans. But generally, across the board, David Bruce coming in, the connection with the Hummel kits, Sunderland fans are getting what they wanted. The branding, the logos, the till the end, everything, the follow the Mackham stuff in the build-up, the social media is excellent. And obviously, it's made easier when you're winning. Of course it is. But the club just feels so aligned in a way that I haven't really witnessed in my lifetime, to be honest. The investment at the academy of the way Granit Xhaka's changing things behind the scenes, the structure at the club with Florent Gasolfi, Christian Speakman, everything that Kira Louis-Dreyfus is doing now, it feels like a club really geared up for major professionalism to achieve something. And it is a remarkable feat when you consider where, to bring it back to the derby, where Newcastle were in January 2024 and where Sunderland were in January 2024 for the clubs now in the Premier League anyway. I know Newcastle United have Europe and they do well in the Cups, but to be on an equal footing with perhaps Sunderland a little bit better at the moment, not saying Newcastle don't have some good players, but because they do, and they're badly out of form at the moment, and they're going through a little bit of a rut. But it's an incredible achievement for Sunderland to come that far in such a short space of time, and perhaps a little sign as well that Newcastle United have stagnated a little bit under the Saudi-led ownership. I do accept that once you get to a certain level, to go to the next level, it actually becomes really hard, like those little steps, which is perhaps something Sunderland will have to be aware of one day. But it's just a hugely exciting time to be a Sunderland fan. As I mentioned, we just keep getting moment after moment after moment. And you almost feel like, when's it going to end? It's like that Mick McCarthy thing, isn't it? Like, I think Phil actually wrote about this a couple of weeks ago, but it can't happen again. Sunderland can't do something special again. And it's like, oh yeah, it can. And you just wonder, when's the luck going to run out? Like, I was going, the mentality of a Sunderland fan going into that derby thinking like, well, we've had some good moments this season, so this is probably where it ends, and it's probably a bump back down to reality. And they just keep on producing. And we should probably talk about the game at some point, but I just felt Sunderland wanted it more, Jace. I felt they just wanted it more, and I was surprised by how poor Newcastle were. It wasn't an amazing game in terms of quality, but I felt Sunderland, they dug in more, they wanted it more, they understood the assignment. I thought a lot of Newcastle's players looked like deer in the headlights. Anthony Gordon and Alanga were completely anonymous, and I was really worried about those two players before the game. I thought our fullbacks handled them very cleverly. And it was such a poor attacking performance from Newcastle that Eddie Howe and Jason Tindall, they almost looked stunned. And I think that was reflected in his post-match, wasn't it, Jace, where I don't really think they understood what had happened and what had happened to the team and what Sunderland had sort of put them through, because just the desire, the 50-50s, it was all Sunderland for me.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I mean, obviously I sat in on Eddie Howe's post-match press conference, and he was asked, was the idea to sit back and hit them on the counter? And he was like, well, actually, what we were hoping to do was to be compact. And then as a sort of, the consequence of that, it's natural that you're going to play a counter-attacking football. It wasn't necessarily the aim to be, hitting Sunderland on the break, but the priority was to come to the Stadium of Light and to put in a solid defensive display. I think what you're saying is absolutely right. What he couldn't have counted on, and what I think genuinely did sort of astound him and obviously disappoint him, was that his team offered absolutely nothing in terms of creativity, in terms of, composure, the quality that, we're both Sunderland fans, we both sort of say it begrudgingly, but Newcastle have got some wonderful players. That's, I don't think we should be playing down, we talk about form and all that sort of stuff, but Sunderland have just gone and beaten a team who are in the Champions League. Regardless of rivalry and local interest and emotion, a team who line up with Bruno Guimaraes and Sandro Tonali in the middle of the park, and we will get onto him because you can't not talk about him. But Granit Xhaka, just completely head and shoulders above both of them. Just colossus compared to what they put in. And so I think from a Newcastle perspective, a lot of the frustration will come from the fact that they didn't give the best account of themselves. From a Sunderland perspective, I think there's a lot of pride to be taken in the fact that the reason, or a large part of the reason, that Newcastle weren't able to give a full account of themselves was because Sunderland just simply did not let them. And it was, for the first hour, Sunderland did that. There was that sort of slightly nervy 15-minute period in the second half where Sunderland sat back and it looked as if Newcastle were maybe getting a toehold in it. Although I think it is important to caveat that with the fact that we've seen Sunderland do that numerous times, and Sunderland are actually, for the most part, quite comfortable letting teams have the ball and sit sort of on the halfway line, passing it back and forth and lumping balls into the box for Robin Roos to come and collect. Like, that's Sunderland. That's where Sunderland are most comfortable in a lot of respects,
Yeah.
And then, from even later on, in the game, talking about that intensity, you bring Trey Hume off the bench and he's flying at challenges and celebrating them like goals. It's just from start to finish, Sunderland had more battle about them. They had more grit about them. They looked more up for it. And again, if we're talking about a Wear-Tyne derby, from a visiting perspective, that is unforgivable, because there should be no question about, you can talk about quality and productivity, but there should be no question about grit, and you determine to win the game. Eddie Howe again was asked about that, and he said, someone said, like, did your players understand the emotional stakes going into this match? And he was like, well, 100%, like, we've hammered the message and but based on the evidence of what we saw yesterday, maybe that didn't get through as far as he would have liked.
I was going to say, I don't think that's gotten through to some of Newcastle's players. I can't remember the wording exactly, but if you look at Nick Voltemada's Instagram story after the game, it's worded really weirdly. It's not even necessarily sort of an apology. Anthony Gordon, I've seen a couple of Newcastle accounts on social media actually remark on this, not necessarily criticising Gordon, but Anthony Gordon after the game said something like, well, we'll put it right against Fulham in the Carabao Cup. And you've got Newcastle fans sitting there going, you can't put this right until March. You don't understand. You can't just put this right by winning the next game. And I think Eddie Howe absolutely understands what it means to the region, but I just wonder if Newcastle have got caught within this sort of, they've had the Champions League game, then they've got the derby, and then they've got the Fulham game, and I just wonder if they've got the priorities wrong a little bit, to be honest. It's interesting that the psychology, and I'm sure the coaching staff have made them aware of how big a game it is to the region in terms of Newcastle United. But you wonder, are they aware of like the little bits and pieces of history? That's what I took away from talking to the Sunderland players, Granit Xhaka, Robin Roos. We spoke to Enzo Lofay after the game. They were hyper aware of what had happened 2 years ago, and they weren't at the club then. They knew what the derby meant. You got the impression that they'd been educated on the minutiae of it. And it felt to me like Newcastle weren't educated on the minutiae of it. Yes, they understand it's a big derby game, but and perhaps it's just a mentality thing as well. When you do have that Champions League game, it's professional sport. It's tough to get to go again, and go to the well again. But that's what you have to do if you want to be a big team. You want to be a trophy winning team all of the time. You have to find that consistency. Newcastle didn't have it. Sunderland were able to capitalise, and I felt that we've learned a lot about this Sunderland team. We know they can produce big moments, but we also know now that they can handle pressure. We know that they can come from behind. We know that they can deal with adversity. Sunderland have lost 4 games in the Premier League this season. They've won the game after every single time. They haven't lost back-to-back games in the Premier League this season. It's an extraordinary stat. They are unbeaten at home coming into the new year. Do we have another home game before the new year? I don't think we do we? Or is the one? Leeds United. So there's a half decent chance, I would suggest, that Sunderland go into 2026 unbeaten at home in the Premier League, which is just ludicrous for a newly promoted club. And even if they don't, even if they lose to Leeds at home, that's still an extraordinary run from the start of the season until the last game of the year. So yeah, it's halcyon days. It's brilliant, and it's just reward for a fan base. I mean, Newcastle, I know Sunderland were were in the Championship and League One for some of this, but Newcastle also spent the season in the Championship. But Newcastle haven't beaten Sunderland in a league derby for 14 years. It's crazy. That includes, the 6 in a row. So it's quite a nice period to have lived through in terms of that. But just to get back to the game, because I'm drifting, I know I am, but I just want to talk about Brian Brobby, because I just thought he was absolutely outstanding. I wouldn't have started him. I would have started Isidore. That's just the way I like to do that 60-30 split. I quite like Brobby coming on when Isidore sort of tired everybody out, and then you're confronted with this raving lunatic of a Dutchman who just wants to fight you all the time. And towards the end of the game, I find that really good to watch and really effective. But the way he just understood his assignment from minute one, he held the ball up so well. You don't often see like an old-fashioned centre forwards performance like that anymore. I thought it was beautiful to watch on the eye in the best possible sense. It was phenomenal. Some of his touches, and he's not the biggest bloke either in terms of his height. He's not really, really tall, but he held the ball up better than Voltemada. I thought he really set the tone. And in terms of his pressing as well, which was highlighted on Match of the Day, him and particularly Talby and Traore as well, to be fair, but they really pressed from the front. They pressed intelligently. They made Newcastle go places they didn't want to go with the ball. They pressed in a way which made Newcastle go down the line. And then when you went down the line, you had Ronaldo or Miquele, who were very, very good defensively. So I thought from a tactical perspective, Lebris nailed that again. But for his forwards as well to carry that out, with Lefebvre maybe pushing a little bit further forward at times, I thought that front three were magnificent. In particular, Brobby and Talby, I thought got through a hell of a lot of work. And you have to be really disciplined to do that, I think, throughout 90 minutes, particularly when you could argue the team weren't functioning in an attacking sense as freely and as consistently as they would have liked during the game. So to not be getting a lot of the ball, to not be having a lot of excitement and a lot of fun, but to still manfully stay on your duty, which is to press and harry Newcastle and hurry them and close them down and get the crowd up, I thought was brilliant. And it was typified by Brobby, who was just an absolute battering ram. And he got absolutely nothing from the referee all game. He was getting, pulled from pillar to post, taps on the ankles, but he was backing into plays. He was making himself a nuisance. I mean, imagine playing against him. Like, he's horrible. He's standing on your toes. He's pulling your armpit hair. Do you know what I mean? He's just an absolute nightmare. And you're coming away from that game thinking, what on earth was that? And he hasn't even scored or assisted, but his contribution to the team, I thought he really set the tone. And again, we've talked on this podcast a lot, but absolutely fair play to him, because there was talk of him being a little bit of a panic buy. It's since come out that he was actually a long-term target of Sunderland. But I just love this mentality that Sunderland have, that they'll identify talent that might have gone wayward for whatever reason, having a bad time for whatever reason. Obviously, Broby's been through some well-documented personal struggles. He was having a hard time in Holland, and it's like, actually, we'll have him. We'll give him a home. We'll coach him. We'll work with him. And it's really powerful when you get the results like that, because that's the sort of buy-in you want from a player coming to Sunderland. And a player, what was that, his second start for Sunderland? So he hasn't even started a lot of games. He's come in for a lot of money. He could have sulked. He was on the bench. He was in and out the side, but his mentality's been fantastic. And that's the buy-in that Lebris seems to get from every member of his squad. And he's the master of that. All of these, these starters and finishers, all that narrative. I just thought it was, I thought Brobby was the catalyst. I thought he typified everything that was good about Sunderland.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just a quick aside before I got on to Brobby. In the first 5 minutes, Bertrand Traore gone flying into Lewis Hall twice. And I think if that's...
And you don't necessarily expect that from Bertrand. No, he did
this is what I'm saying, and like I've been converted to Bertrand. I'm a convert, whatever. But like he's not that sort of player, is he? And if you've got Bertrand Traore putting in that sort of graft and flying in early, and obviously it's got to be measured, it's got to be under control, you've got to keep a certain lid on it. But I just thought from the off, that sets the tone for, right across the pitch. That was the sort of performance that Sunderland were able to put in, and that they ultimately did. In terms of Brobby, I couldn't agree more. The big thing for me is that when the ball goes into him, it sticks. His first touch is like Velcro. You can count on him to, it's not, when you're playing a ball up to him, it's not a hit and hope. and you're sort of crossing your fingers that you might be able to retain possession and get yourselves up the pitch. 90% of the time, that ball goes into him. He brings it down, and whether he's got his back to the man or whether, there were a couple of times he sort of does that little 1-2 touch, doesn't he, where he sort of like ricochets on a little wiggle out of space and he's away. And then obviously if you have got your likes of Talby or Lafayette in support around him, it does help to get Sunderland up there. And for that reason, I think that I was completely on board with him starting, especially because I think the flip side of that is that it didn't quite come off for him when he came on. But if you can hit a team who are, first of all, tiring, and second of all, pushing onto you with Isidore's pace in the latter stages. We saw it against Liverpool, didn't we? There's a very, very easy version of events whereby Isidore rounds Alisson and Sunderland win that game. And I think on a different day, it could have happened against Newcastle as well. There were a couple of moments where, especially when Mundell came on down the left, he just didn't quite get his pass right. He didn't quite get the ball out of his feet. Didn't quite hold up in the way that he wanted to. But you can completely understand the appeal of Lebris having that injection of pace in the final 30 minutes of a game, 20 minutes of a game, as opposed to Brobby's hold-up play. But what's nice is that Sunderland have the options to do either now. Do you know what I mean? How long have we seen them struggle with finding any centre-forward? It doesn't matter what profile they are, just somebody who can, first of all, put the ball back in the net or at least contribute or at least run the channels or something. Now they have a couple of options, plus Mayenda, by the way, who he was the one at the start of the season, wasn't he? He hasn't played a lot of football recently, but they now have genuine options rather in attack, and it's wonderful to see. And perhaps the biggest compliment I can give Brobby is that by the time he came off, like it was 60th, 65th minute, he was dead on his feet. He had to come off because he'd ran himself into the ground. And obviously, I think there's an argument to be made for the fact that he's still coming into full match fitness. I think there's still, more for him to reach in terms of his contributions, in terms of his longevity in a contest. But certainly yesterday, with where he's at right now in terms of his work towards that full match fitness, I don't think you could ask any more from him. I thought he was absolutely magnificent. And there were several of them. Obviously, we mentioned them already, but I do think it is worth noting, again, just how good Granit Xhaka was. And we sound like broken records, and I know he's the name that every pundit pulls out because he's the one that everybody knows, and anyone who only half watches Sunderland is aware of Granit Xhaka before they're aware of someone like a Reinildo or whatever. But Granit Xhaka, the difference that having somebody like him in the centre of the park for a game like yesterday's, it's hard to put into words. He was absolutely superlative. The way that he dictates the game in a sort of literal sense with his range of passing, with his tempo control. But then on top of that is the more sort of intangible stuff, how vocal he is. The way that he pulls players into position, and he is that sort of conduit, isn't he, between Regis on the touchline and the rest of the team. He is that link. And again, I know we say it a lot, but I think it is worth emphasising just how good he was yesterday, because he is such a difference maker for the Sunderland side.
Yeah, I have a lot to say on this. I think when you mentioned tempo control, I've never seen anything like it, to be honest. It's like an optical illusion. The game can be fraught, it can be end to end, it can be back and forth, it could be things happening. As soon as that ball is passed to him, the game slows to his tempo. I don't know how he does it, whether he's got mind control over his opponents, but it's paradoxical because he slows everything down, but nobody can get near him either because of his positional awareness, because of his awareness of space. It's bizarre to watch at times because you think he's operating slowly at his pace, but he's not. He's just completely running the game, and it's special when a player can do that at the highest level. I think he's probably, after like 15 games that he's played, one of Sunderland's most influential signings ever after such a short space of time. I mean, the other one that you would look at in terms of what he did at the club over a long period of time and how influential he was would be somebody like Niall Quinn, because he went into the boardroom and stuff like that. But Granit Xhaka's impact on the pitch and off the pitch in the 3 or 4 months he's been here, 5 months, is ridiculous. He's having an effect at the Academy of Light, and he's bringing these sort of world-class standards. I think he gets in, honestly, I was having this conversation with Ian Murtaugh after the game, long-time journalist and friend of the show. He gets into every Premier League midfield, doesn't he? And there was a lot of chat, including from us, about Newcastle's midfield, which is excellent. You can't beat around the bush. Sandro Tonali, Bruno Guimaraes, even though Joe Linton didn't play, Lewis Miley, I think, is an excellent, excellent young player. Underrated, actually, in a sense that he hasn't had perhaps the hype he should have, for given how good he is. He's brilliant. Granit Xhaka and Noah Siddiqui and Enzo Lefebvre matched them. And a large part of that was to do with Xhaka's marshalling. I call him the conductor, but Siddiqui is a very enthusiastic player and a very good player, and he runs and he runs and he runs, and that's fantastic. Sometimes he can just find himself slightly out of position because he's that good that he goes for the ball on the left flank, and 9 times out of 10 he'll win it. But if he doesn't, Xhaka's on him straight away. You know, the way Xhaka will drop into left back, he'll drop into the right back position. He's so tactically astute, tactically aware. And then there's the stuff really that we can't even see from the press box, which is his tactical management as well. Lebris is quite comfortable with him being a general on the pitch and having a hand in tactics. It reminds me, from what I've read and listened to and watched over the years, about Alex Ferguson and Roy Keane. Alex Ferguson was happy for Roy Keane to have a degree of autonomy on the pitch for Manchester United in the glory days. It feels like it's sort of similar with Xhaka and Lebris. He's quite happy for him to make in-game decisions, which, when you've got somebody as good as Xhaka is such a valuable thing to have in your armoury. He's been talismanic. I think he's the signing of the season in the Premier League by far. And I think that call from Kirill Louis-Dreyfus to persuade him to join in the summer will go down in legend. And it's special as well to have a player who is that good. He's 33 years old now. He finished, 16th in the Ballon d'Or a couple of years ago. He should be playing in the Champions League. He should be chasing trophies. But to have him acknowledge that he's done all that already, that he doesn't necessarily have to chase the money or legacy in terms of trophies and European accolades, but he wants to come to Sunderland and build something and leave something lasting. For him, the level of player he is and the character he is, to recognise the potential of Sunderland, it is a really, really special story. And perhaps I'm doing him a disservice. Perhaps he's come to Sunderland with trophies in Europe in mind, and that's what he wants to be, his legacy. You wouldn't put it past him. And who'd have thought at the end of the game that he would be channeling the spirit of Bailey Wright against Sheffield Wednesday with his little cut on his head? Like, who thought we'd say that sentence in 2025? But yeah, he's fantastic. There is no player in the world you would want as your captain in a derby more than Granit Xhaka for me. He's been brilliant. Completely understands the club. He was aware of the shenanigans 2 years ago. And his impact, I think, is really hard to measure and to do justice, even though we talk about it a lot. And you are right, pundits speak about him a lot. He's the go-to, he's the recognisable name, he's the headline addition. But the more I hear, I think the more we don't actually realise the full extent. We have a fairly good picture, but I think his influence goes above and beyond. On my social media, on my Twitter, there's a piece, a special report into Xhaka and Florent Gasolfi's influence at the Academy of Light, and it's the devil is in the detail with stuff like this, and it's the small habits that build a football club and the culture right through to the top. And he's spending time with Sunderland's youth players. He regularly goes into Sunderland's youth team dressing room to say hello. He greets every Sunderland youth team player by name if he sees them. Like, if you're Jensen Jones or Finn Geragousi and somebody like that, and Granit Xhaka's on the door at the Academy of Light saying, "All right, Finn. All right, Jensen. How you doing? Watched your game the other day. You know, let's talk about this." And that's not just Granit Xhaka as well. That's other players, Luke O'Nien, Enzo Lefebvre. There's a really good culture at the club. But to have that star doing that is it's special. It's a special story, and I think we're only scratching the surface with it, and I think there'll be a lot more to come out over the years. Who knows what he'll end up doing in his Sunderland career? Who knows whether he might become a coach one day, whether he'd want to do that, what's been promised to him. But I think at the moment we just have to enjoy him, because technically I think he's probably the best player I've ever seen play for Sunderland. Players that have scored more goals, arguably have had more of a flashier impact. You know, of course, people like Kevin Phillips scored so much for Sunderland, Niall Quinn as well. But in terms of like his just technical ability and ability to influence the play in the era in which he's doing it in as well, which is arguably the best ever era of technicality in England in the Premier League era that he's doing it in is fantastic. I could talk about him all day, Jace.
I think really telling thing was Xhaka. You know, we ran a poll a couple of weeks back where we asked, you know, readers, fans to name their best ever Sunderland, like Premier League era Sunderland 11. And Xhaka at that point had played a dozen games and he won 73% of the vote. You know, and I know recency bias and we talk about all that sort of stuff, but
that's the thing though. You almost have to check yourself, don't you? Because you're like, should I be saying this stuff when he's only played that amount of games for us? Like the stuff we've written about, you're writing it thinking, am I going really over the top here? But it's not.
No, he is just that good, isn't he? And I think one thing I wanted to highlight, like the flip side, obviously you're talking about, you know, he's walked away from Champions League football and you know, ostensibly chasing trophies and all that sort of stuff, at least for a season. But then, you know, the flip side of that is that in terms of what Sunderland can offer him as an experience, and I know we are biased, I get it, but there aren't too many clubs where he could have gone and first of all being presented with the challenge that he so obviously craved, but then also can go and experience something like he did yesterday, where you've got that atmosphere, you know, that unity, the length of time that the fan base stayed in the ground after the final whistle. And it was almost like a mega mix, wasn't it? It was song after song after song after chant, and then they put the highlights up on the new screen. And I guess I kind of just want to talk about the atmosphere at large, James, because prior to the game, and I know we were there very early, but there was almost a little bit of, not like an unease, but it was almost like the calm before the storm, wasn't there? Where we were sort of going, is this going to feel like a proper derby? Because it's been such a long time and, you know, you're just waiting for it to sort of ignite. But as soon as, you know, both sets of fans properly descended and as soon as everyone was in the ground, it just went to another level, didn't it? I mean, word on the display because it was magnificent, but just how vocal the support was all the way through. And yet again, you know, it's not just lip service because the players themselves have said it, but you can't help feeling that that's got to have been some kind of factor in the way that Sunderland performed yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really emotional couple of days. It's probably remiss of us to have not mentioned this earlier, but obviously we're excited about a derby win. But the sad passing of Gary Rowell, you know, former Sunderland hero, Echo columnist as well. I was in the Harvester with a couple of friends from school in Ryop, and my friend Smithy said, "Oh, like, Gary Rowell's passed away. It's all over Facebook," and it really makes you stop in your tracks. You're like, "Oh my God," because that's a name like Charlie Hurley that we're all weaned on. We're weaned on that legend. His legend will be passed down through the generations. My son will know his name, and you know, my son's son will know his name because he scored a hat-trick against Newcastle and set up the other. So that was a big shock on Saturday night, and all of a sudden you've gone, and there'll be people in a similar boat as me. You've gone from being in the pub or being out for a meal or even just being in the house, nervous and looking forward to a derby. It then switches to pain and grief and upset, and you're reacting to the death of a Sunderland legend who's sadly passed away far too soon at the age of 68. And of course, we extend our condolences to his friends and his family, his ex-teammates, and to Sunderland fans as well who grew up loving him. My father-in-law said that he was Darren's first ever Sunderland hero, and that'll be the same for a great many number of people. So I think that had an effect on the morning. I really, really do. It felt a little bit flat around the ground in the build-up towards the game. But when we got into the stadium, the tributes paid to him were really moving, really special. And I must credit Newcastle fans as well, because they applauded during the minute's applause. The players wore black armbands. They stood in the centre circle. His picture was up there on the screen. The whole stadium did a fantastic job of several renditions of Gary Rowell World. And I was actually in the Roker end before the game just to shoot some video and have a look at the scenes, which were incredible, by the way. But they were all singing Gary Rowell World, as fans were around the ground as well. So it was a really special and moving tribute. And there was about 11 minutes to go. I think Sunderland were 1-0 up. And Newcastle were just starting to turn the screws a little bit. Sunderland were under pressure. and the Rock Rangers started singing "It's a Gary Rowell World," and that to me felt like a really special moment where I actually thought, I don't think we're going to lose today. I think we're going to be quite comfortable, and it was the emotion of the day that I think carried Sunderland through. And crazy, really, that he passed away 50 years to the day since his Sunderland debut, which is just it's just incredible how these things happen sometimes. Really, really sad. And the legend that he is, there's only, I think, 2 players after the war to score a century of goals. I think, what is it, Len Shackleton and Kevin Phillips. I think Gary Rowell's the third, which puts him in esteemed company. Just an absolute Sunderland legend, the biggest of Sunderland legends, to do what he did against Newcastle, to be from Seaham as well. I know he's got 2 sons. My heartfelt condolences to them. But I did feel that emotion permeated through on the morning of the game, in terms of it being a little bit quiet. But as time went on, it was definitely a let's do this for Gary Rowell, and for him to pass away the night before a derby as well. It absolutely felt that he was looking down on that win, and that the players did it for him and understood. We talk about them understanding the game against Newcastle and what's gone on before, but I think those players absolutely understood what it meant to Sunderland fans to hear that Gary Rowell news. And a very sad aside to a good weekend. But I think what you do have to say is that, Gary Rowell would have been absolutely delighted with that performance, absolutely delighted with that win, and hopefully the club can remember his name in a really positive way, and the tributes will roll in. And I think, what else can we say about him, really? It's sad to say goodbye to such a great man and such a legendary figure at Sunderland that we've all grew up knowing about. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is, and obviously I echo absolutely everything you're saying there. Just an icon of the club, a name that is synonymous, a name that I think you hear before you even know who he is. Do you know what I mean? He's just someone that you're aware of from day dot, aren't you? And then you learn why, and you learn the law.
I think when you're a young Sunderland fan, and when I was a young Sunderland fan coming through, and you hit your teenage years, you do hear these names, but you go to the games and you hear the songs, and you think, like, well, who's Gary Rowell? What did he do for us? And then you're taught. Charlie Hurley was another one. Like, I didn't necessarily know all about Charlie Hurley until I started going to the games, and the songs were still being sung. And then you learn and you speak to people and you look into these things, and you're just like, oh my God, he scored 3 against Newcastle away from home. He's from Seaham and he set up the other one. It's just like, I mean, imagine somebody doing that now, and the reverence in which they would be held is, it's no wonder his legend is carried on through the generations.
Stuff of dreams, isn't it? Stuff of dreams. And like you said, a sad footnote on what has been a wonderful weekend. Just quickly looking ahead, I guess, before we sign off on this pod, James. Obviously, this was Sunderland's last game before a lot of the lads head off to AFCON. Next weekend, it is Brighton. An away trip to Brighton is never easy at the best of times, but then obviously Regis is now going to have to contend with the fact that it's probably going to end up being 6 players, I think. Obviously, Habib Diarra has been called up, Simon Adingra hasn't, which could prove to be quite the boost for Sunderland. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting next run of games now, isn't it? Because I think there's been everyone was so focused on December, the early part of December, the likes of the Arsenal back in November, but then you had like Liverpool and City and then the derby, and it's kind of been building up and ramping up. And then suddenly we're faced with this next run of games, which isn't going to be easy in itself, but then also the prospect of losing these players. I mean, another really vital part of Sunderland season is what I'm trying to say, I guess.
Yeah, it is an interesting game coming up. Actually, Brighton are in poor form. I think they haven't won in the last 3. They lost the last game, but they're a really good side. They're really well coached. They've got a lot of good players. I mean, Danny Welbeck, I think, is 3rd in the Premier League goal scoring chart at the moment. So they are really, really dangerous. As you mentioned, historically, particularly at home over the years, I think it's a big boost to have Mundell back in the squad. I know he came on. I was wondering if he might start, but Lebreus didn't go down that option and was obviously vindicated as well. So having him back's a big boost. The Habib Diarra one's a strange one because we haven't had him fit and available. So you'd feel Sunderland can negate that because they already had. The big ones are Siddiqui and Reinildo, aren't there? And of course, Bertrand Traore as well has been very good. As you mentioned, big chance for a Dingra. But I mean, Sunderland have made us look silly in a way because I think as fans, pundits, journalists, we all perhaps over-analysed AFCON a little bit. But given how well Sunderland have done, they're now 7th with 26 points from 16 games. They've eased the pressure a little bit. And we all looked at this horror run of fixtures, including Liverpool, Man City, Newcastle, even the Bournemouth game. And we've coped quite well. We beat Bournemouth, we beat Newcastle United, we got a point against Liverpool, we got a point against Arsenal. So suddenly the horror run doesn't look so horrific anymore. The Leeds game coming up at home, that's going to be important because if Sunderland could win that, the gap between them and Leeds would be quite significant. Just looking at the Premier League table now, and Sunderland are 13 points ahead of 18th place West Ham. We know the Premier League can change. That Premier League table will significantly shift and change around Christmas because it always does. We will learn a lot about this squad. We will learn a lot about Regis Lebris and how he can handle it. But I'm quietly confident, given what we've seen so far. I think, as I say, Siddiqui and Reinildo will be big misses, but I think there's enough in that squad. And I'm tipping Sunderland to strengthen in January as well. Our friend Taff, who does the Q&As with us, he's adamant that Sunderland will be a real force after AFCON when they have all of their players back and perhaps a couple of January additions as well, if they can hit the ground running. So I'm quietly optimistic. But what we know about Lebris and what we know about Sunderland, they just will not be thinking beyond Brighton on Saturday. They just won't be thinking about anything else other than that. They will approach that game. They will get in the zone for that game. Hopefully, they'll put in a good performance. I think there's a little bit of a challenge because Brighton are a good side and you have had that emotional high of the derby. Can you then be consistent again in the Premier League against Brighton away from home? It's a big ask. It's tough, especially when you've had such a big game that you've thrown all of your energy into. But those are the breaks. If you want to be a top side, if you want to stay up, if you want to challenge for the top 10, we have to start doing that. So I'm really interested to see how it goes. And moreover, like, really nice Christmas. We've just beaten Newcastle at home. Everything's rosy in the world. Sunderland are good. You know, we've had some great moments this season. It's not been the struggle we anticipated. So we're looking forward to these games now, aren't we? We're looking forward to Brighton. We're looking forward to Leeds. You know, we're looking forward to going to Tottenham Stadium for the first time. And then we've got, you know, Brentford in that little run as well. Like, bring it on. We might lose 1 or 2 of these games, maybe even 3. But there's no need for panic stations if that happens. I trust the coaching staff implicitly. I believe they'll have a plan. And I believe they've earned a lot of trust. And I have a lot of faith in this group of players as well to get themselves motivated and get themselves going again. Sunderland are in a fantastic position. Who knows? It could all slip and slide out of our hands and it could be the biggest tanking of a season ever. I don't think that's going to happen, judging on what we've seen. I think there's loads of reasons to be positive. And I think we're going to approach these games with a real sense of excitement. It's nice to be in the Premier League over Christmas again.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. That's all we've got time for on this week's show. Join us again next week when we'll be discussing all the latest Sunderland news and developments. In the meantime, follow all the latest Black Cats news on the Sunderland Echo, or you can give us a follow on social media as well. Thanks to James. Thanks to you for listening, and we'll see you next time.